members and those that are with us in the chamber and those that are joining us online for this evening's Cabinet meeting on the 2nd of March. If I may have authorisation to sign the minutes of our last meeting held on the 2nd of February 2026 as a correct record of proceedings.
So moved.
Thank you very much. Okay, are there apologies for absence, Lisa, please?
There are no apologies, Chair.
Are there any additional agenda items?
There are no additional agenda items.
And are there any urgent decisions?
No urgent decisions, Chair.
Thank you. A disclosure of interest to receive any disclosures by members and disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests, non-registrable interests in matters on the agenda, and the nature of any interest and details of any dispensations obtained. Members are reminded of the need to repeat their declaration immediately prior to the commencement of the item in question. Councillor Timpey, Hazel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Item 11, Community Asset Development, Member of Bexhill Town Council and also Director of Old Town Occasions, trading as Manor Barn. Thank you.
Gareth, Councillor Delaney.
Item 8, funding of Rother Voluntary Action. I'm a director and Rother representative.
Thank you, Gareth. Any other declarations? No? Okay, let's move on to the first report, which is agenda item 6, key performance indicators. Anna Evett, Head of Corporate Strategic and Neighbourhood Services, will present this report. Thank you, Anna.
So the new suite of KPIs for 26-27 were presented to Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The recommendation was to keep everything the same apart from one change, which is, I think, N5 fly tips. So that KPI was to monitor the fly tips, but it's been recommended that that one is removed. The main reason is we don't have a contractor anymore. That isn't to say that we don't issue fines for fly tips, because we very much do. And a lot of the work that we do to prevent fly tips is to do the roadside stops, where we stop vehicles to check what they're carrying and if they have a waste removal licence. So really that's it in a nutshell, the same set of KPIs, but with one amendment to remove the fly tips monitoring.
Thank you, Anna. Are there any, questions? Councillor Field, Catherine?
Yes, I'm disappointed that the fly tip monitoring has been removed, because fly tipping is a horrible issue and it affects urban and rural areas and is very unpleasant and often very unhealthy. But I just wondered if you know, and I suppose you might not know, you're not monitoring it, has it got worse since the County Council started having its booking system for the tips?
I'll let Anna come back on that.
Yes, it hasn't got worse at all. No, it hasn't. We did think that it might get worse because people would be, fly tipping more, but it actually hasn't.
I think most of it happens in Kent, doesn't it? I'm afraid. Councillor Project.
Thank you. It's a big issue in rural areas, particularly with farmers, because if people dump on their land, and they have all sorts of things dumped on their land, if they dump on their land, it's their job to clean it up, not ours. And we had, when we had our police briefing last week, we did learn that actually there's going to be another of those stopping vehicles to see if they have a waste licence, and it is an excellent service, not done enough, stopping vehicles to see if what they're carrying, but they also at the same time they check their licences, their tyres, all that kind of thing. And the police have the powers actually to confiscate the vehicles. And so that is a real deterrent for people who are seriously carrying loads of rubbish to dump in the countryside. And I think it's something that we need to keep a close eye on. We had an issue down in near Robertsbridge on the borders of farm there, where the police told the farmer to put great big logs across their gate entrances to stop the fly tipping, which they did. And then county came along and said they got to move them because they were a liability for the county. So it is a big issue in the countryside. Thank you.
But I suppose given the fact that we haven't seen a serious increase of fly tipping, but it's something which we can't be complacent on, and I think everybody has a responsibility there somewhere, and it's something which under the KPIs we will hopefully would be able to keep an eye on. It's important that we do. Gareth, Councillor Delaney.
Can I just ask, without a contractor, how will we measure whether fly tipping is increasing or decreasing?
We still look at it as part of the joint waste contract, so we know how many fly tips we ask BIFA to remove. For example, as you said, Councillor Prochak, we can't do anything if they're on private land. It's up to the landowner to remove them. But we do know how many fly tips are happening. We know which ones we're removing via through BIFA and the waste contract. So that bit is still covered. The only other thing that I would add is with fly tips, we very rarely do get the evidence. So people generally don't leave, a piece of paper with, a letter with the name and address in. So monitoring it hasn't been particularly effective. However, it is what you said, Councillor Prochak, and the stopping and searching of those vehicles. That has been our biggest deterrent so far.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that when the word gets out amongst the fraternity that are out there that are abusing this, they will have to think about it, and certainly confiscating of vehicles and various other things is a serious deterrent. Okay, so we're asked to consider these proposals. These indicators are sufficient to provide effective monitoring of the Council's operations and make recommendations to Cabinet. This has come forward from this report. It went through the scrutiny committee, and therefore I would like to feel that we can approve the key KPIs with regards to set out in the report. Paul, you haven't put up your hand to say anything, but I would welcome your comments if you feel that you would like to do so.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I would agree. I haven't got much to add that's not already in the minutes. It's sort of disappointing that we don't have a contractor, and that's the reason, as Anna said, that we can't really monitor something if we haven't got a contractor we can monitor it, but we can't sort of issue the fines if we haven't got the contractor, or as many fines as we might like. So maybe that's something we need to look at. On the other side, there was Councillor Burton sort of questioned the climate strategy and what sort of KPIs we can put on that. But as was explained to us by Anna, the data that coming from that and from sort of national organisations is usually sort of 18 months old. So it's very difficult to sort of see if we're improving or not when data is sort of quite old, if you like, and almost sort of out of date. So that's why we haven't looked at that one or added anything on that as well. And I think the fly tipping, your nerdy wells are always going to do it. And I would say that our BIFA contractors are excellent. If I've ever reported anything in my patch, so I can report stuff in the morning, and by the next morning it's gone. So they are really good on top of it, because once someone sees a pile of garbage dumped somewhere, someone else adds to it. So we get it cleaned up pretty quick. So they're very good. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. Have I got someone that will move this report? And second, and those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you, Anna, for the work you've put into this. We can move on to the report, page 13, item 7. Rother-owned / leased accommodation policies. This is a report of Joe Powell. Are you presenting the report, Joe? Councillor Rory McCourt is going to present this report. Over to you, Rory.
Thank you, Chair. It's fairly self-explanatory what this report is all about. These policies are a statutory requirement of us as a registered provider. And it's also good practice that we update the policies in light of any legislative changes which may come along as well. So I won't keep everybody here all night by delving into any of the detail, because as I said, I think it's fairly self-explanatory. And if there's any questions, then I think, colleagues in housing have been more than able and willing to answer them. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Rory. Are there any questions from members online or in the chamber? If not, we could move forward on this if I can have a proposal. Moved by Councillor McCourt and seconded by Councillor Bayliss. Thank you very much indeed. And those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item is item 8 on page 81, identifying the funding of rather voluntary action. Anna, this is, you're declaring? Yes, redeclaring. Thank you, Gareth. This is a report from Anna, Head of Corporate and Strategic Neighbourhood Services, to consider the ongoing funding for RVA. Can I just sort of ask a question, Charlotte, perhaps? This is a funding matter, but should this service level agreement not have been brought forward before the budget? Is there a reason for that?
No reason for that. The proposal for 26-27 is standstill funding, so that's what's in the budget, so there's no deviation.
No deviation from, so the existing arrangements would continue in the budget, it's agreed in the budget and continue for the next 12 months. Right.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I just needed to clear that in my own mind. Forgive me. Anna.
Thank you. So this is to seek approval to enter into a 2-year funding agreement with Rother Voluntary Action. You will see from the Cabinet paper that for 26-27, as Charlotte has said, it's the same amount of 38,000, and for 27-28, it's 34,200. Now, this tries to balance the need for savings to be made in the next financial year, plus looking at supporting RVA to really support us in the vital work that they do in the community, and also to ensure stability as we go through to local government reorganisation. There's an additional aspect to this funding, and that is for RVA on our behalf to set up the Rother Age Friendly Network, and that's to the sum of 30,000 for 2 years. We work very, very closely with Rother Voluntary Action. They're our key partner. They support all the voluntary and community sector organisations within Rother, and they bring in a lot of income through funding into the district. So I'm very much hoping that you are supportive of continuing the funding for 2 years with that added element of the 30,000 for the age-friendly Rother.
Thank you, Anna. Are there any members who want to ask a question? Gareth and then Catherine. Gareth?
Yeah, just as the representative on the board with the RVA, I did look at this, and we talked about it a little bit before, about whether it would be a good idea to perhaps try and look at maintaining the funding in the following year at 38, given it's a small amount of money and they do an awful lot for their funding from us. They don't particularly have any, it's tricky raising funding from other sources. And we're going into a sort of a critical time for the voluntary sector, for all of us, but the voluntary sector in particular are going to need a big steer through LGR. And to be fair, I would like Rother to, if possible, to consider keeping the funding flat at 38 through the next 2 years, just to recognise the difficulty and the amount of work that they're going to have to do with those voluntary sector communities. Thank you.
Okay, Gareth, thank you. Catherine?
Yes, thank you. Following on from what you said at the beginning, Councillor Oliver, I have concerns about the timing of this. I think it is very strange, well, just odd. We're asked to look at this, there are figures involved, we're asked to adjust them. About 3 weeks ago, we set our budget. Now, it seems to me that it would have been far more practical to have had this discussion with the RVA before we set the budget, because if you do it afterwards, it means you're going into negotiations with your hands tied because you've set a budget, or going into negotiations without your hands tied and then just undermining something you've agreed 3 weeks ago. I think it's some strange timing.
Would anyone like to just respond to that, Lorna or Charlotte?
Thank you, Chair. It's my understanding that the budget was set for 26-27 at 38,000, which is what this proposal says. So it's the changes for the following year, which is in line with the 10% we've taken off all the budgets. So that's where this 10% has come from. So that principle that we have discussed before is being reflected in the second year of funding.
So you're saying that this is exceptional and there are no other SLAs to be decided coming so soon after we've set a budget?
Charlotte, please.
Yeah, I mean, there's another agreement on this cabinet agenda, so there is that one. I'm not aware of others. Anna may be able to add something. I mean, just to clarify, as I said, what's proposed in here for 26-27 aligns to the budget that you've set. We don't, when we publish the budget, we don't publish individual budget lines. So from a negotiating position, that wouldn't necessarily be transparent. And in terms of the medium-term financial plan, that is obviously a live document. So we will continue to refresh that as further information and further decisions are taken by members. So should you take this decision today, we will incorporate that in the next revision. Of course, members are always taking decisions, and an MTFP can only incorporate the decisions you've taken at the point. So it doesn't incorporate this decision to reduce this funding by this amount, the decisions that you've taken previously, because you haven't taken those decisions. But of course, you'll always continue to make more.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Councillor Bayliss, Christine.
Yes, thank you. I would support keeping it at flat for the following year. And another project that we're working on is obviously the community hub in Devonshire Road, and I feel that we need to make sure that they have sufficient funding in order to run that and manage that building properly. We bid with we supported their bid, and we're working with them on the changeover and the alterations to the building to make it fit for purpose. And I just feel that it's an exceptional circumstance, which is why I feel we should keep it the same at 38 for the second year as well.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Council Projects.
Thank you. I'd like to put a different angle on it, in the sense that we've got LGR coming down the track, and it's going to come quickly. And I think what we should be doing is sending out a message to the new authority. This is what we support, this is what we think is needed, and this is what we think it should be supported minimally, really. I mean, that celebration that we attended of the 50-year celebration, it was an extraordinary event, extraordinary. And when I look around this country, I feel sorry that so many things are broken, so many things are broken. But communities and volunteers are not broken, and we rely on them hugely. And I think, Leader, you once said that RVA was like another arm of the council. And certainly in my experience with RVA, the things we've set up locally in our village wouldn't have been possible without the support of RVA, their training and their support. And so I'd like us to think now, decisions we're making should have an LGR health check on it. And I would support keeping it the same.
Councillor Rory McCall. Rory?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question, really, and maybe as we have one board member here, might be able to put you on the spot, Gareth. And it's related to local government reorganisation that you've mentioned, Sue. And it's about, I mean, there's RVA, there's Hastings Voluntary Action, there's 3VA over in Eastbourne and Wealdon. Has any talks been held between these organisations to pool the resources? Because whatever unitary comes along would make sense, that there's potential economies of scale and some savings to be made, you know, in that sort of area. I was just wondering if that was on the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
One would like to think that there is discussions towards that. But again, more questions than answers, so we don't have that benefit. My own feel is that this arrangement will continue for the next 12 months, but I'd like to review it in 12 months because we have a situation, there should be things coming clearer down the line on LGR, we would hope. And because of the vital role that RVA play within our district, I think we owe them that. You know, I often think that they are part of rather district council, where the way they pick up and run with things and support our community where we haven't that resource. So I would like to feel that we could just defer that reduction until we review it next year. That's acceptable, is it, Charlotte?
I mean, of course, it's a member decision to take. I suppose I'll just highlight a couple of things before you take the decision. And absolutely, I mean, it could be reviewed in 12 months' time. I don't think that was Anna's proposal was for a 2-year funding agreement to give the RVA certainty. So I think that's worth considering in the decision that you take. Obviously, I appreciate this is a small saving, and this organisation do, without doubt, really valuable work. We do need to consider the saving in the context of our wider financial picture and the savings we'll need to make across the board over the next couple of financial years. The other thing I maybe just suggest is if we are moving forward with funding as proposed, that perhaps in the agreement itself there is a clause that allows the council, should it need to, seek exceptional financial support from the government, that we can reopen the conversation about the level of funding, because if that was to happen, and I'm not suggesting it will happen over the course of the next 2 years, but if it was to happen, this council would need to make some very different decisions about the funding that we can provide to partners. So just suggesting.
Sue.
Just to ask quickly, you said with the Delaware cuts that you had to give them a year notice. Is this the same?
Defer that question to Anna. I think she's proposing a 2-year funding agreement here.
I'll have to get back to you. I'll need to check on that. But I was going to add that quite an important part of this proposal is the £30,000 for the rather age-friendly network. And that's going to make quite a big difference to RVA. There's a lot of crossovers with the work that they currently do for us, aside from that age-friendly work, but there is a lot of crossovers. And I think one of the things that is really important, and we do have a board member here, but it is the stability, and it is by entering into a 2-year agreement, it does give them the ability to plan how they're going to do things. You know, you might remember with their East Sussex County Council funding, they had to wait for a really long time to get the assurance that they were going to get that funding, and they only got it at the last minute. So it is really important for them to have a forward view on what money is going to be coming in.
Thank you, Anna. Councillor J1, Ash.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's one of these complex ones where you're balancing the value of what the organisation does. Obviously, with budget, I've been obviously working very closely with Charlotte and with heads of service around budgets, and the key driver has been predominantly geared around a 10% reduction across the board. So it's always a challenge when you have inconsistency, but you've got to try and balance it with what value you get from the organisation. So I do think this is a really tricky one. I think what I would be more comfortable with is
the first year, obviously we're in agreement that that is the fixed amount, and that we do propose the reduction in year 2, but with a review at the time that we're setting the budget, because at that point we may be able to review some of the cuts or some of the savings and offset slightly. But I think if we stick to the static funding for the 2 years, it just makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable about the uncertainty, about the inconsistency that it creates, and the work that obviously we are doing day in and day out with heads of service within Rother and other organisations. And as we've already mentioned, there's 2 other voluntary organisations that do work closely. And would that then set a bit of a precedent as to that's, you know, you're then excluded from that? So totally agree that it's a much better option to give a longer picture for RVA so they can see what is happening over the next couple of years. But I would be much more comfortable with reducing as planned the 10%, but with a review at the point that that comes into play against the budget, and whether or not there's any movement that we can do and offset with any other savings, etc. Thank you.
Any further points, or are you prepared to sort of support that?
I think you've summed it up really well, but the thing that I always bother about with council, this is the principle. It puts us in a straitjacket, and it's not necessarily the right thing. So I hear what you say, and obviously would support that, as long as there's a clear message that we're going to look at it again, in the hope of increasing, not cutting further.
Sorry, can I just clarify? So absolutely, the minimum would be the 10% reduction. So that amount would be the minimum, but obviously with the scope of actually going further if we could. So when we say a review, it's not to bring it further down than what is already proposed.
So RVA will have the awareness that they've got this a 2-year situation, budget facility, a level of financial support, which is, I presume that you've discussed this with RVA, and they are agreement of that. We're saying that we would like to review it in 12 months with a view to, developments within LGR in order to make sure that this organisation continues to support our residents. Yeah. So are we in favour of that? You're moving that? Yeah. Seconding that? Those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, Ash. And thank you, Anna. The next item is the item 9, 1066 country funding, which is on page 89. Again, this is Anna's report, along with Cabinet Member Councillor Hazel Timpey, to approve the grant funding agreement with 1066. Anna?
Thank you. This is a very similar item. It's the same principle of looking for a 10% reduction. For 26-27, it keeps the funding at the same level, but then for 27-28, the proposal is for a 10% reduction. I think a lot of people here attended the members' briefing for 1066, which was excellent, and I think it really did demonstrate the wonderful work they do to bring in money into the Rother economy through tourism and through businesses. But again, it does balance the need for savings to be made whilst recognising the important work that 1066 does, and also preparing them for local government reorganisation. And I know the conversation for the last item was talking about the need for us to demonstrate our support for these very important organisations. But I think we also have to look at making sure that they are sustainable, and particularly for 1066, that they look to increase their membership. And as they are at the moment, they're making excellent use of social media and influencers and those other mediums, rather than more, I suppose, old-fashioned ways of marketing that other organisations have used in the past. So again, we're looking at that 2 years of funding with the same amount for next year and a reduction in the year after.
Thank you, Anna. Councillor Timpey, Hazel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, let me just refer to that presentation before I begin with talking about this DMO. I think this 1066 has been probably one of the most underrated partnership that we've had in this council ever since I've been here anyway. And Joe will know how long I've banged on about that. But I think that presentation showed everybody just the amount of work they do for this little amount of money that we give them. As the conversation we've just had about RVA, I think actually does also refer to this particular contract, because it puts them in a very vulnerable position with any reduction. I tried to support it, obviously, in my comments, going along with the savings that you're all trying to make, or we're all trying to make. But I do believe that that we really ought to do the same for 1066, that we ought to look at exactly what we just decided for RVA, because I truly believe that the significant boost we get to our economy and our employment figures, etc., etc., it's very measurable, and the results, we do see them daily with increased visitors, etc. So I would like to propose, going back, can't remember the words you used, Julian, but the exact same thing, that we, in this particular contract, we do say that we will review it after the 12 months, because I think that's crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. And I think if you read the introduction that's attached on page 95, you know, this is an integral organisation that is supporting our area, and I think they've stepped up and stepped forward since the demise of when Hastings pulled away from it, Hastings Borough Council pulled away from it, and we've been able to bring in some exceptional personnel in order to take us where we are at the moment. And with the Year of the Normans coming up and that we've got this situation, I think we're all very, very keen that we continue to support this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'd like to support what Councillor Timpey's proposal or motion with the addition that Councillor Giwan proposed for the RVA. I mean, I was really impressed with the presentation that the 1066 people made at our briefing session, and it's since occurred to me that actually there might be some opportunities to develop 1066 in a sort of way which might make it more sustainable long term, and that would be to think about not only tourism but inward investment, and also about drawing people to work down here. As an economic development lead, I've been doing a lot of work over the last 2 or 3 years with various organisations who find it really difficult to employ and draw down graduates to work in Rother and the Hastings Travel to Work area. So if you talk to the NHS, they have trouble recruiting doctors and you know, all the sort of graduate entry employment opportunities there. If you talk to Bexhill Academy, where I'm a trustee, they have trouble recruiting teachers. We have trouble recruiting planners and environmental health. Hastings Direct have trouble recruiting actuarial scientists. And this, you know, this extends right the way across. And I just sort of feel that this actually might be a sort of vehicle which you could use to, you know, come and work in 1066 country. I mean, it sounds, you know, automatically it sounds really good. And also, when we're thinking about drawing in, you know, inward investment, those bigger ticket items. Now, East Sussex County Council cut back on inward investment funding 2 or 3 years ago, and I think we've noticed the difference. So So I just like, I don't want to make a formal amendment to the motion, but I would just like officers maybe to take that away and think, actually, if we just expanded the remits slightly, we could actually increase the budget. We could draw down other funding that would potentially pay for that. I'm sure, actually, if you looked at sort of organisations like Hastings Direct, the NHS, they may well put some money, funding into that if they felt they would be able to recruit the sort of staff that they need. So that would be my plea, and you know, this is a really good vehicle for me to have raised this tonight. Thank you.
Aaron, yes?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to make everyone aware, I'm sure you all are, it's been in the news recent days about the first tranche of tickets going on sale for Bio Tapestry. They've on 7 July, and obviously the first visitors expected there in September, December of this year. So I think it might be worthwhile just kind of maybe reviewing in 12 months' time to see what happens with the current estimate of visitors who are said to be coming along to see the tapestry while it's at the British Museum. So, yeah, for those reasons, maybe it is worth just having a look in 12 months' time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Councillor Projak, and then I've
Yes,
got
and
Ash
just to
and
say that
Rory.
echo how amazing their presentation was. Extraordinary, the amount of effort and results that they get is extraordinary. But going back to Councillor Baylis's point, if you look at their constitution, they actually have attracting visitors and investment in their constitution. And they're also working with, I don't know anything about the Sussex Local Visitor Economy Partnership, which they mention. But also we will have the advantage this time next year of knowing about LGR. Well, we think we might. but so we will then perhaps get this information that we ought to be getting to see what other organisations there are across East Sussex. So I would support that recommendation.
Thank you, Sue. Was it Rory, Ash? Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would support Councillor Timpey's view on a review, and perhaps obviously given the challenges with the longevity of the council, it's whether we kind of adopt that as our practice when we're looking at anything further than 12 months, because obviously, you know, we're making decisions on a year-by-year basis as we happen. So if we are considering anything for more than that, then I think it should be our practice that we do have a review period for any funding for a 12-month that we agree from this point moving forward. Thank you.
Rory, yes?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, yeah, I support the proposal. If you look at the stats, it's quite interesting that it seems that 1 in 5 jobs locally are in the hospitality and the tourism industry. So it's a major part of the economy. For me, I think we've got to invest to grow that. I'm a bit miffed, though, that you know, Hastings benefits from this, but they don't put a penny into it. And Wealdon have a small grant as well. And obviously, I would like to think that we can open negotiations with Hastings and with the LGR coming along to actually, you know, promote the whole of this area of the South Coast, because it seems to me that we're putting the money in, doing a lot of the work, and they're deriving benefit from it. So that seems a bit unfair, to say the least. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Timpey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just so you know, a lot of the businesses that are members of 1066 are Hastings based, so they do contribute. And we thought it was, when we were looking, when Hastings pulled out, there was a discussion, well, how are we going to support those businesses? And should we just leave them, you know, to die? And we decided, no, we will continue to support them, even though Hastings Borough Council gives us nothing. So, just so you know.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I don't think we've got any other questions. But I think it's not only LGR coming forward, but it's the actual role of the Strategic Mayoral Authority. What will they be looking at when it comes to tourism? And it even goes back to what will they be looking at with regard to charitable organisations? We don't know. But I think if we continue to work with those that we've got within Rother, going back to RVA and 1066 marketing, and that they are equipped and good vehicles in order to support going forward, it gives us that encouragement of saying to whoever it might be, this is an organisation that are doing a tremendous amount of work and we need to continue to support them. So I think that we've got some words around that, have we, Lisa, with regard to continuing this arrangement along the same lines as the RVA wording? Yeah? You're proposing that?
Yeah, I propose, thank you.
And Ash will second that. And those in favour of that, and that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. May I just ask where we are with regard to this intelligence information that we've asked for from Hastings?
Oh,
Intellectual property?
yeah, we are writing to Chair.
Okay. That is an important part of what the organisation wants, so we are in touch with them, so that's fine. Okay, next item. 10, risk register. Anna's been exceptionally busy this last month.
Yeah, there's a change of theme for this one.
Sorry?
There's a change of theme for this one.
Okay.
So this is the risk register. We had an external audit recommendation that Cabinet should have a look at the risk register at least annually. So this is for Cabinet to review the risk register and the key strategic risks facing the Council. Also for the risk policy to be reviewed, particularly the risk appetite statements and scoring that is within the risk policy. You will see from the report that I'm not recommending changing any of the risk appetite scores. From when we first started with the risk policy and risk appetites, we've reduced our appetite to take risks quite considerably. When we first had it, we had a high risk appetite to take financial risks, for example, and we've reduced that right down to low. So for this year, I'm not proposing, I'm not recommending that we change any of those risk scores. I think it still is very important that we are very prudent in terms of our appetite to take financial and other risks. Yep, so that's really it. So it's to note the risk register, and I'm happy to take any questions on any of the key risks facing the local authority, but also would welcome your thoughts about the risk appetite scores.
Thank you, Anna. Questions? Points on the report? Or are we comfortable with the recommendations?
Chair.
This is a report that we will be looking at on an annual basis.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I would like to say this is an excellent piece of work. I mean, this is my area of expertise in the education sector, and it's an impressive piece of work. And I have no reason to question the risk appetite, the matrix that's set out there. The only issue that potentially I might have is how this might play into the corporate programme board that meets once a month, and whether they should review this in light of management of programmes and the savings programme, whether they should look at this as a committee and make recommendations to Cabinet. I just feel that the learning from that committee could really easily play into how we manage risk.
Did you want to come back on that, Anna?
Yeah, so the Corporate Programme Board, they feed into our strategic risk register. So they follow the same protocols as we've got outlined here. So everything is aligned already. And you'll see for projects, we used to have quite a high risk appetite for taking, you know, on speculative projects and investments, and that's reduced considerably. But yeah, I do agree with you, but it's already aligned with the work that the Corporate Programme Board and the Capital Development team do.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Councillor Delaney, Gareth?
I think it's just with the new one around the. I think it's the new one around the asset transfer, and it's quite a low number, and there's so many moving parts with that as a project or projects. Are we thinking that might go up? You know, depending on how things go. I mean, there's so many things could go wrong, so many things could go right. But yeah, I just thought that was that bit low, perhaps.
Yes, it's very subjective, isn't it? I think with the asset devolution programme, and we've got Joe here with us, I think everything is mitigated as far as it can be. At the Corporate Programme Board, I think Councillor Bayliss and Councillor Prochak brought up the risk about legal services and the ability to actually get those transfers done on time. We have agreed that we will go through the framework and go through our legal provider, but then we will look to get external support for legal. Also with a bit of a change of approach to how we did devolution before, where it will be a package of, you know, this is the asset, this is how it is. I think you've described it as a bit of a take it or leave it scenario, but it's, you know, there's not a lot of negotiation. The assets are the assets, you know, the land that they sit on is the land that they sit on. And if there are any issues, we're not going to be able to, you know, change anything. They're going to be transferred really a bit like we would with a statutory asset. So I do take your point, and it could be that risk score does go up as we get a bit closer.
Thank you, Anna. Councillor Bayes, Christine?
Yes, can I sort of follow on really from that perspective? We have challenged significantly and robustly around the risk, around the asset transfer, and fully support the explanation there. The mitigations that are now in place reduce the risk score. So you might, you know, on face value at the beginning, the risk score might have been very high, but then the mitigations that you put in place reduce that score quite significantly. But we continue to monitor it really closely.
I'll let Anna come back on that.
Yeah, for Councillor Delaney's benefit, it doesn't reflect, as Councillor Bayliss said, it doesn't reflect the inherent scoring, it only reflects the residual scoring, so post-mitigation. So that's why it might be a bit lower, but this is one that we will monitor at every corporate programme board.
Fine. Any other comments? Joe Powell. Joe?
Thank you, Chair. There's only an observation that this is a corporate risk register, and while the projects may have risks of being successful, otherwise the assets themselves will remain in public ownership, so that the material risks corporately are perhaps less than the project risks themselves of being successful or otherwise and actually transferring the assets. It's a slightly different thing it's measuring. Yeah.
Okay. So, can we have this report recommended that Cabinet have oversight of the corporate risk register? And second, Teresa, thank you very much. Those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Are you going to go now, Anna, or would you like to stay? Okay, right. Next item is agenda item 11, community asset transfer update. This is being presented by Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, thank you. This report updates Cabinet on delivery of the...
Just a second, I think it's redeclaring.
Yeah, I just need to redeclare.
Redeclare.
Yes, apologies I didn't declare at the beginning. I'm a member of Battletown Council.
Right. Okay. we've got that. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so the report updates on the delivery of the council's service and asset devolution framework. So over the past year, we've assessed expressions of interest and the business cases that have been received. And there are, as a result, 71 assets now recommended for community asset transfer, which are set out in the report. We're asking Cabinet to approve these assets to transfer subject to finance and legal due diligence, and to grant delegated authority to officers so that they can progress the transfers efficiently. So some assets come with additional operational responsibilities, and parishes and town councils will be required to meet the appropriate share of the parks contract to ensure maintenance standards continue. So as we've just discussed, the approach is transfer as seen, so take it or leave it, to avoid protracted negotiations with valuations and statutory requirements built into the process. Overall, community asset transfers will protect valued local facilities, support community-led management, reduce the council's long-term liabilities, and align strongly with our climate, equality and wellbeing objectives. Approval tonight will allow us to move into the final phase and complete transfers within the planned timescale. And as I mentioned in my paragraph in the report, this is a real opportunity to place community assets in the hands of the communities that use them. And I would like to propose the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank
or
you.
the resolution, sorry.
Resolution, thank you. Are there any questions, or anybody add anything? Councillor Projects here?
The story of the toilets. I'd just like to congratulate officers for the time, because it's not been easy at all, because the view of a lot of parish councils is you're asking us to take these assets on. They're called assets, but actually they're going to cost us a lot of money, and so we're not going to get help with that. So it hasn't been straightforward, and the two councils, it's Rye and Bexhill, were obviously where the most work was needed, because they had the most assets to be transferred. Not all assets are being transferred, and we need to think about what's going to happen with those. But I just want to congratulate the officers on their really quite hard negotiating and trying to get the point over to a lot of parish and town councils. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was a case of sort of moving into the unknown, and we were finding out things as we were going forward, and having to work with our towns and parishes in order for them to understand the implications of what LGR is about and how it's going to work, and bearing in mind that this is being done to us, so there wasn't an alternative. But I think it's a tremendous amount of work that's gone into here from by officers, lead officers, to bring us to where we are. And thank you, Christine, for supporting this as it is. So are there any other points, or someone can, Councillor Field, Catherine?
Yes, thank you. Page 163 lists Kingsmead open space as an asset in Battle, which it certainly is. But it does say that the Town Council appears to be having it. Well, the meeting of Battle Town Council I attended, where they discussed this, they decided they didn't want it. So has something changed since that meeting? I don't know. Has something changed? I mean, why does it say here they're having it when I heard them say quite clearly they didn't want it?
That was also news to us. So what's changed is their mind, I think, on wanting that asset.
I don't think that's quite fair to say they've changed their mind. I think they've now discussed it and decided that they don't want it.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Which they're at liberty to do, presumably.
Yeah, 100% within
absolutely.
there. Yeah, prerogative, completely, yeah. No, we'd respect the decision. 100%.
Yeah. So if any decisions are made retrospectively because all of a sudden further information has come forward or whatever it might be, then that's going to be possible. Yeah.
100%. Further to my earlier comments on the last item, that this is about supporting parish and town councils and others to empower them to take on assets if they wish to take them. And absolutely, it's about safeguarding those assets for the future generations and for local communities. We wouldn't be in a position of, assuming or presuming that they would take them. Yeah.
Councillor Timpey, Hazel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The other evening, last Wednesday at the Bexhill Town Council, there was a motion put forward pretty much accusing Rother that there would be double taxation on some of these assets. And I just want to alert officers that you need to be very clear when you're devolving how that affects the precept, because there's still the notion that there's double taxation, and of course you and I and everybody else in this room knows there isn't, but we need to be very, very clear. So if we could do that, that'd be great. Like with a monetary amount, this means X amount out of the precept.
Oops, right, sorry. Perhaps I could invite Director of Resources to respond to that point, Hazel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, we have received an email from Bexhill Town Council, which I haven't yet responded to, but it is in my inbox to deal with. I mean, fundamentally, we are still running these services. Rother District Council is still in possession of these assets. We have levied an appropriate special expense on the residents of Bexhill and Rye separately through the special expense through the council tax that we set because we're still delivering these services at this point. At the point at which that changes, obviously we will reflect that in any subsequent special expense that is levied. And of course, there is the opportunity, if those assets were to transfer before the 31st of March 2027, for us to evaluate of the special expense that we have levied and collected, what appropriate action we take in respect of that balance of funds that we hold.
Hazel, you want to?
Thank you, Charlotte, for that really clear explanation. I think we also need to be clear when we're talking about special expenses that included in that, of course, is the waste contract, which it will be ongoing and will still be an expense that they will have to put into their own precept. So, thank you.
Charlotte?
If I could just clarify, I think we should also be clear that there are expenses that the council incurs and relate to special expenses that we levy on the respective parishes, which don't relate to assets which are proposed to transfer to town and parish councils. So it's very unlikely that special expense will be removed completely because we'll only remove it for those assets. Also, just to clarify, the main waste contract, we collect the funds for that through council tax more broadly from all residents within Rother.
Yeah, I could just need to be clear because there is a feeling that all residents think that once Rother disappears or once these assets are transferred, there'll be no more special expenses, which of course is not correct. So you've explained it really well. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Councillor Project, Sue?
I just wanted to mention one thing which I forgot, which was that we've always said we would go to town and parish councils first, which is what we've done. But there are community groups out there who are also keen to take on certain things. And I'm thinking about and I'd like to thank Joe for actually saying that he would initiate and help with getting people around the table of those community groups that want to take things on. Thank you.
Councillor Paul Osborne. Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can. I know there's obviously a bit of concern in the room, or it seems like there'd be a bit of concern in the room, or from others about this list. But personally, I'm sort of looking at it with sort of satisfaction. I'm looking at sort of Settlescombe, who sort of bombarded me, mobilised their village and bombarded me with emails, and they're getting sort of essentially what they want. They're getting a car park and the toilets and not a coffee shop. Also, Canberra, have got long leases on the two items that they've got. They should be getting a freehold on that, so that's good. Peasmarsh as well. So, you know, I'm looking at it as satisfaction. And the same with Norvium. You know, Norvium sort of mobilised themselves and sort of said we want the car park for the surgery. They're getting the car park. So to me, I'm looking at it as all good. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Paul. I think that people have sort of, the pennies dropped in many cases. It took them a little bit of time to get their head around it all, and I think that's not unreasonable, because this was a massive change of where a local authority will not be after 50 years, and where the local towns and parishes and community groups will need to step in to protect these assets for the community. Right, so we have a situation where we need to move. It's been moved. Yes, and second, Teresa, thank you. And those in favour? Excellent. And it's been a massive amount of work when you think about it. You know, it hit us with a blast, didn't it? And we had to sit down, and we brought in people that were able to work through it all. And given the fact that with Stuart Cuddigan and with Greg, have been able to bring this forward to where we are now, and I think that's a real credit to the officer team. Right, okay. Exclusion of press and public regarding the item that we're going to discuss, item 13.
So move.
Moved. Second. Those in favour? To public session, and I think concludes the business for this evening. 1935. Thank you for everybody. And where we got to tonight. Thank you.